Okay, let's get started. How's the volume on this? You all can hear me? Okay, anybody can't hear me? Welcome to Psychology and Economics, which for the rest of the semester we will refer to as Behavioral Economics, for reasons I'll explain. My name is Dan Ackland. I'm a little bit old-fashioned, so by and large I encourage undergraduates to call me Professor Ackland. I don't want to go into why, but let's just pretend I'm an old fuddy-duddy. So let's see. If you haven't already, grab a lecture handout. Does anybody not have a handout? There's some on either end of the bench here. We will hand out the syllabus later. There's not a syllabus here yet. You'll get that later in the session. So for some reason, my computer is not responding to itself. I've had this problem before. I do not remember why it happens. Fiddly-dee. Come on now. Why do you not want... Sorry about this. Let's try that. Okay, and then we will do this. Good. Works. Great. Oh, and my coffee has arrived. Now the class can really begin. Okay, so what are we going to do today? Let me get your attention back. I apologize for the technological glitch. What we're going to do today is I'm just going to give you a simple introduction to a couple of the core concepts that are going to shape the whole class. The first one is this very fundamental concept of rationality versus irrationality. All of you should have taken Economics 100A or its equivalent, and so you will have been introduced to the concept of rationality as one of the basic assumptions of our model of consumer choice, or individual choice, above and beyond consumer choices. And by and large, I've taught that class a couple of times, by and large, having established that rationality is a perfectly fine assumption for our models, the rest of the class you kind of didn't talk about it very much, my guess. So we're going to talk about it a lot, because it turns out that the assumption of rationality, A, is largely misunderstood, B, is often wrong, and C, as a result, there are frequently situations in which economic models that assume rationality wind up predicting things that are wrong, and indeed suggesting public policy solutions to problems that we face that are bad. And so we, rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater, I am an economist, I like economics, I like economic models, and I want to preserve the amazing accomplishments that we've achieved in neoclassical economics, but I want it to be better, so I want to address the reality that in many cases our behavior does not satisfy the assumption of rationality. That is the biggest topic of the course. It is, in fact, the defining concept in behavioral economics. That is what makes behavioral economics what it is. The other thing the other concept that I want to put on the table right away is this dynamic relationship between prediction and valuation. Now, if you read what is typically either the introduction or chapter 0 of your 100A textbook, you will have read a few paragraphs about the difference between positive and normative economics. Positive economics is the business of describing and predicting things that actually happen, observable phenomena. So I wrap that all up under the heading of prediction. Okay? Positive economics is about using economic models to make predictions about things. If I raise a tax, what will happen to the quantity of the good produced and consumed, and what will happen to pollution. Valuation is the business of normative economics, right? Normative has to do with values. It's typically thought of as subjective, right? You have your values, I have mine. We could disagree. Economic models, and you've seen this anytime you've computed consumer surplus or producer surplus or compared, say, a monopoly without price controls to a monopoly with price controls, economic models provide a tool for assigning numeric dollar values to economic outcomes or public policy strategies. So this is a normative tool that we use for evaluating whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, or whether this public policy is better than that one or vice versa, or whether, for example, the government should intervene in a market or not. Okay, so our models are simultaneously predictive and evaluative, positive and normative. I could basically send you all home right now with the main take-home lesson of the course, which is this. Rationality, as it turns out, the assumption of rationality, is the glue that holds together the positive and normative dimensions of microeconomic models. And what we will see over and over again is that when we change our models to account for human irrationality, we will begin to see that the normative and positive dimensions drift apart. And we will see that we will be able to do typically a better job of making predictions about what will happen in reality, and we suddenly find that we're not so able to put dollar values on things because the normative power of our models typically starts to disintegrate. So, that said, we'll talk about the syllabus towards the end of the class, but I want to begin right away by showing you an example of what I'm talking about. This is an experiment. I'm going to present you with a lot of experiments. Behavioral economics proceeds to a large extent on the basis of experiments. A lot of them are in the lab. How many of you have ever been a participant in an X-Lab experiment? A few? I don't think there's still anybody here who would have been part of the X-Lab experiment I conducted when I was getting my PhD here. I hope not. Am I right? Good. And more experiments are happening outside the lab, controlled field experiments. So I'll be presenting a lot of these kinds of experiments. Here is one by a quite well-known man named Dan Ariely. He's a professor at Duke University. He is known as a behavioral economist, but he's actually a psychologist by training. So he is one of the fine, upstanding psychologists who brings the psychology to psychology and economics, which is badly needed, and he has done some amazing experiments. Here's one. He and his co-authors, whose names are not, in fact, et and al., but I don't remember what they are, they took 55, a classroom. Professors like to conduct little experiments on their students, which is part of why we have institutional review boards. If any of you have ever heard the name Timothy Leary, you'll understand what I mean. Timothy Leary gave his class LSD without them knowing, which is a bad thing to do. So they took 55 non-hallucinogenic students at the Sloan School of Business Administration at MIT. So these are supposed to be pretty smart people. And here's what they did. They presented to these people, sat them down in front of a table containing 6 ordinary products, right? Cordless trackball, cordless keyboard, average wine, rare wine design book, and most importantly for our purposes, a box of Belgian chocolates, all right? So those are Belgian chocolates. They're delicious, and that's them in a box. I don't know if this is actually the box that they sold, some other brand, but this is the product we're talking about. And here's what they did. They did something odd, but really interesting. They asked these people a question, actually a couple questions. The first question was, they presented them with a 2-digit number, which I'll just call XX, and they asked them, yes or no, would you pay XX dollars for a box of Belgian chocolates? Yes or no? XX was the last 2 digits of the individual's Social Security number. Okay? For those of you who aren't from this country, this is a Social Security card, and it has this, it's a bad example of a Social Security card because it has 10 digits, and what you'll know is, if you're from here, is that a Social Security number is supposed to have 9. This is too many. But nonetheless, it gets the point across, which is that they're using these last 2 digits of your Social Security number, which are completely random. Okay? Completely random. And I think I'm right in saying, this is a conjecture, but I think I'm right in saying that everybody in America knows that those numbers are random and have nothing to do with who you are or how much you like Belgian chocolates. So that's what they did. Now, I always do this to myself. I have to go back and erase all of my little doodle marks. Then they asked the second question, and this is the one that actually mattered for experimental purposes. They asked them, what is the maximum amount of dollars that you would be willing to pay for this box of Belgian chocolates? And they did it for all 6 products. We're just focusing on the chocolates for simplicity. In other words, what they did was to elicit each person's maximum willingness to pay, or what we just call willingness to pay, a concept you've undoubtedly come across many times, WTP, for a box of chocolates. Now, if I just ask you how much would you be willing to pay for a box of chocolates, you might answer strategically on the basis of, oh, maybe you think if you say a low number, you'll be more likely to get, to be a bargain with me about it or something like that. But behavioral experimental economists have mechanisms by which we think we are able to elicit from people their sort of true dollar valuation for things. And by true, what I mean is a number that if I actually slapped the chocolates down in front of you and said, put up the money, you would say, oh, okay, fine, I will, as opposed to, whoops, no, I was just lying, they're not worth that much to me. So they elicited willingness to pay. Then they did this. They sorted the students into quintiles of the Social Security number distribution, right, by those last two digits. So the first quintile is people whose Social Security number ends with digits between 00 and 19. And the top quintile is people whose Social Security number ends with 80 to 99. And what they did was they computed the average willingness to pay by quintile, and they got this, okay? People in the bottom quintile of Social Security numbers were willing to pay on average $10 per box. People in the fifth quintile were willing to pay slightly more than twice that much. Okay? Now, so remember that XX is totally random. You got that. Nonetheless, it affects your willingness to pay for chocolate. Yes? Yes, first the one, then the other, for a very good reason, which I'll mention in a moment. Did you have a thought about that?
Yeah, obviously if you ask that number, then that's your point.
That's right. That's right. It's in your head. If I did not mention your Social Security number, it's extremely unlikely that you would have thought of your Social Security number when considering how much you value a box of chocolates. And that's right, and that's important, because most of the time we are not asked anything about our Social Security number before buying a box of chocolates. But it gets at a psychological phenomenon that matters a lot in a lot of situations, and may even matter for chocolates. Okay, so that's crazy. And I say AKA irrational. AKA stands for also known as irrational. Now, irrational and crazy don't mean the same thing to an economist. To an economist, irrational means something very specific, which is this. Well, the most basic definition of rationality in economics is that your preferences, right, your utility function, is rational if you can state a consistent rank ordering of how much of what you prefer, right? If you can rank, say, for example, how much you like $11 versus how much you like a box of chocolates, and if that stays consistent, then you're rational. But if sometimes you prefer $11 to a box of chocolates, and at other times you prefer a box of chocolates to $11, and everything else in the circumstances held exactly constant, your preferences are not rational, because they do not represent a consistent rank ordering of what you choose and what you don't choose. What we see here is a classic example of a preference reversal, right? These people are randomly assigned to these two different treatments, one with a low initial number and one with a high initial number. When we do a randomized experiment, it's effectively the same as saying, I could take the same individual, statistically identical individual, and put them first in the low number treatment, and then, imagine running them, erasing their memory and running them back through the process in the high treatment, and I would get two different results, right? So this is essentially, by randomizing, we like to believe as experimentalists that we then get to claim this is an example of the same people being subjected to different universes, different realities, okay? So imagine that this is really the same individual going through reality two different times in two different conditions, and holding absolutely everything else about them constant, right? Their nationality, the moment that they were born, their entire horoscope, everything. And here's what happens, okay? If you happen to be stuck into the universe where you get a low Social Security number, you basically would say to Dan Ariely, oh, if you gave me a choice between a box of chocolates and $15, I would prefer $15. Take the same individual, erase their memory, put them back through time, stick them into the high treatment, absolutely everything else about them in their world is the same, and now they say, actually, Professor Ariely, I prefer the box of chocolates to the $15. Okay? This person does not have a consistent rank ordering of their preferences. That's what we mean by irrational. Now, I would argue, just as, taking off my economist hat and just speaking as a member of the body politic, I would say that's crazy. In this case, that's crazy. You should put your Social Security card away when you're buying chocolates. Which is simply to say that, by and large, human beings do some pretty crazy things. Okay? We do some pretty crazy things. Depending on what your life experience has been, you will have observed yourself doing some of these kind of bizarre, crazy things, and we'll go through the semester and you'll start to see, oh, everybody does that? I'm glad to hear that everybody does that, because that's nuts. And so, we will be looking for these sort of consistent irrationalities that show up across the population in lots of situations and that cause deviations from the predictions and valuations of our standard models. Yes?
How are the other colors generated?
These are just the other 6 products. They just did this 6 times so that they have more data. They wanted to demonstrate that it wasn't just about chocolate. Is that your question? Are they different? The rare wine? Oh, it's not monotonic. Good call. This 18 seems to be out of order. Is that what you were calling attention to? My guess is that that's just what's referred to as an artifact of the data, right? I mean, this is random, yes, but it's only 55 people, so you're going to get some weird stuff, right? So what you've got here, in all likelihood, is that some of the people in this quintile, just by random chance, happen to not care very much about rare wine. That's probably what's going on. And that's just a defect of the experiment, and if you did it with 1,000 MBA students, that result would probably go away. Okay? Typically, that's what that's about. You want to be, so you just did something, it's interesting, so it's got to be something about wine, right? Because it shows up there as well. So there's a couple of people who really don't like wine stuck in that third quintile by chance. So you just demonstrated 2 things. One, it's really important to look at the results that aren't being reported, that aren't being discussed, because you may find interesting stuff there. But also you need to think hard about, well, is that really statistically significant? Is this something that we should pay attention to? So thank you very much for pointing that out. Okay, what else do I want to say? Okay, just for your information, this is called, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. So you're saying if the price is being based in some sense, or they're given to think that the price is being based on their Social Security number, isn't that sort of like the only information they have about the chocolates, other than how hard they're salivating? But I think that the idea behind this experiment is that no sane person could possibly think that there's information in the last 2 digits of your Social Security number. Your mind doesn't know that. Right? What's going on here is that we have a mind that was designed for survival in the jungle, and now we're asking to do it to do complicated things like predict how much we're going to want to pay for a box of chocolates we've never eaten before. And it does really well at certain things and not well at others. And we have this function where, and I don't understand the neurology of this at all well, but there's something in our minds that evolutionarily over time we got some benefit from locking on to numbers and running with them, and it's not that useful to us anymore, but we're stuck with it. Okay?
So if they don't use the Social Security what would they think their based on?
Well, past consumption of chocolate, presumably, or how right? I mean, you may not have eaten that box of Belgian chocolates, but you've eaten Hershey's. So we can talk more about that. I think this experiment is pretty well conducted. It's pretty rigorous, and I think it's, you can always try to make a case for why some weird thing happens on the basis of something that doesn't seem so weird. If you go and read this article, everything I do up here is online on BSpace. So you go read through it, and I think you'll find that they will convince you pretty thoroughly that they've addressed all of those kinds of concerns, which is a good reason to go and read these things after I present them. Okay, So this is the anchoring effect. It shows up in all kinds of places. One of the main places that economists worry about it is in bargaining, right? The first number that gets put on the table is an anchor. And I could show you some really interesting and rather disconcerting results. It does matter for Belgian chocolates. If you were a purveyor of Belgian chocolates, where would you prefer to have your chocolates sold? In a store that sells mostly cheaper chocolates or in a store that sells mostly more expensive chocolates, right? You'd want to be in the expensive chocolate store. People would come in and say, "Whoa, chocolates are worth a lot, aren't they?" Right? Now, you've been eating chocolate all your life. You for sure have been into a store that sells cheap chocolates. But these are the kinds of ways that people, that's why a lot of behavioral economists get jobs in marketing departments. Okay, so let's do something with this. Oh dear, I'm sorry. My animation is messed up. That's not supposed to be on the screen yet. So, as you will recall, willingness to pay is the height of the demand curve, right? Right, the demand curve, the height of the demand curve is defined, so I'll just slap a demand curve up here. It's defined as the maximum amount that the marginal consumer would pay for the marginal unit of the good, right? Which is to say their maximum, their willingness to pay. So, what can we do here? Suppose that we start by representing the demand curve, because you could show this person multiple different quantities of Belgian chocolates and ask them the same question over and over again, and you could map out their demand curve for different quantities of chocolate. And let's start by imagining the person who had a Social Security number that ended with 20, okay? And we'll say just arbitrarily that this is a map of their willingness to pay, so we'll call it, sorry about this. And I have this new computer with a new stylus, and the eraser function doesn't work very well. So that is something we will all get to chuckle about for the rest of the semester while I silently fume. I bought this laptop used from a colleague, and I'm trying not to curse him out loud. And no, it's not a Mac. So we'll call that D for XX equals 20, okay? Then we take somebody, for example, who has a Social Security number that ends with 80, and what we would find if we, and they do this, by the way, in the rest of the paper, you can see this exact thing, and they map it out, and you would get something that might look like this. This is demand curve for XX equals 80, okay? Does this really mean that we'll call this person 80? Does it really mean that person 80 likes chocolate more than person 20? I hope I've convinced you that it doesn't. However, what happens in economics, what happens in normative economics, the way when we use our models to do valuation, is we do this. We go and we get some data set that some marketing firm has generated that shows the price-quantity combinations for chocolate across time and across cities and across whatever, and we say, oh, from this price-quantity data set, we can chart the demand curve for chocolate, which means that we get to say with some confidence, this is how much chocolate is worth, right? So this demand curve, besides being an annoying way to make you jump through hoops when you're taking undergraduate upper division classes, it's a real thing. I mean, I don't know, I think sometimes when I was taking, undergraduate and intermediate microeconomics, it was like a toy. It was a plaything. But it's not. It's an actual policy analysis tool. People actually go out and they estimate the slope of these curves and the height of these curves, and they say, that is how I'm going to assign value to chocolate. Right? And now I'm going to implement a policy. I mean, this is very real, right? There's all kinds of talk in this country, and I'm guessing probably elsewhere, about putting a tax on sugary foods and drinks, right? So people very seriously might go out and estimate the height and the slope of a demand curve for chocolate or soda or whatever else, and say, if I imposed a 5 cent per ounce tax on this chocolate, what would happen to the quantity of chocolate consumed? What would that do to the rate of childhood obesity? And what dollar value would I place on that tax? Would it be an increase in social surplus or a decrease? Okay, so this is very real stuff. And what I hope I've convinced you is that in certain situations that we as behavioral economists want to claim are predictable and systematic, this demand curve is no such thing. It is not a stable and reliable tool for determining how much things are worth. Yeah?
I have a question. I mean, what's the difference between irrationality and ignorance? Because people don't necessarily understand how much Belgian chocolate should cost. So that would be a case of ignorance, whereas
that's right.
Just using this random number to sort of fill in that they're ignorance.
So I think your comment is related to the one that the woman in the back made. I think that you're exactly right, that what is happening in terms of neuroscience, psychologically, what's happening is that people are taking that number, right? If you haven't ever eaten this particular type of Belgian chocolate, your mind is, I'm asking you how much it's worth, and your mind is sort of like floundering around like a fish in the bottom of a boat. It doesn't know. So it's grasping at straws. Give me something, anything. Oh, my Social Security number. Fine, good. Now I can think clearly. It's not information. So this should not in any way detract from your ignorance. If you have no idea how much you value Belgian chocolates, consulting your Social Security card does not mitigate the problem, right? So the ignorance should be evenly distributed across the quintiles, right? This is what randomization does for us, right? When you randomize, you get to say, these things should not be different. Whatever your explanation is, it shouldn't differ. Okay. So if your willingness to pay depends upon your Social Security number, how do we know how much you really value Belgian chocolate? And how might this change what we believe to be true about economics and about the world? All right. Now, to try to answer that question, I'm going to ask you guys to do a little bit of work. You might think, hey, look, that guy's getting paid. He should do all the work. However, it turns out that pedagogically it's much better if you do as much of the work as possible. So I'm going to ask you to do this. In a moment, not now, in a moment, I want you to just sort of stick yourself into little groups of 4 or 5 with the people around you. It doesn't matter who it is. Try not to leave anyone out. You've got this diagram. Okay, this is what I call the X marks the spot diagram. And I have these 3 questions, which are numbered 1 through 4. I don't know how that slipped in there. Imperfection. So 4 questions that I want you guys to puzzle over, try to come to some consensus about the answers, and write them down on a piece of paper. 1, what economic model is this a diagram of? 2, what kinds of things does this model allow us to predict, right? What changes or actions or something, outcomes does it allow us to predict? What does it tell us about what is good or bad for society, for how to run a society, for example? And then what are some of the assumptions of this model? Before you start this activity, let me reassure you that you know, in your mind are the answers to these questions. You may currently be in a state where it's hard to retrieve that information, so hopefully working together as a group will help. I promise you this information is in your head, and by the end of the semester you will know it by heart. So go ahead. Is it clear? Okay, go ahead. Spend about 5 minutes talking amongst yourselves. And if you have any questions for me, just let me know. Raise your hand and shout out. Okay, let's reconvene. Hopefully you've had a time to retrieve some of those thoughts that I hope that you I hope you discovered that I was at least partially correct, that the answers are in there somewhere. So let's just see what some of you guys came up with. Where's my stylus? Anybody? Sometimes I stick it in my hair. Okay, so what economic model is this a diagram of? Supply and demand, okay. S and D, sure. What? Anybody? Any other answers people came up with? Perfectly competitive supply and demand. Now, supply and demand give us both sides of a market. So, can I just call this a perfectly competitive market? Yes. Good. Thank you. Who said that? Good. So, I deputize you to just say yes or no anytime you feel like it, and we'll go with that. So it's interesting, right, that these two answers came up, because it turns out that when we model a market, now if you ask a sociologist what a market consists of, they'll talk all about the history of your country and your culture and the weather and all of your norms and all these other things. If you're an economist, you're a reductionist, right? Simple, simple, simple. Make it so simple nobody believes you're right. And so we say, look, it consists of two things. It consists of a bunch of consumers and it consists of a bunch of suppliers. We can write down a model of how consumers make their choices, and we can write down a model of how firms make their choices. From those models, right, you got a utility maximizing consumer or a profit maximizing firm. From those models, you can extract mathematically a supply curve and a demand curve, and you're done. That's the whole model. That's a market. You've modeled a market, okay? This, it went away. This happens to be a model of a perfectly competitive market, and we will talk more about what that means as we go through this little exercise. Okay, good. Now, let's see. Do I want to do this? Sure. What's the height of this curve? We've already said. Willingness to pay. Okay, that's your willingness to pay. Which, if, I'm going to hold off on that. What's the height of this curve? Marginal cost. It's the marginal cost to the producer. Great. We could think of this as a measure of the benefit that the consumer gets, right? So we have marginal benefit, we have marginal cost. Great. Next question. What kinds of things does this model allow us to predict? Right? So let me just jog your thought process a little bit. Predict means if I do this, then that will happen. Okay? Yeah?
Predict how a change in price will affect the change in quantity.
Okay, so the effect of a price on quantity, right? Now, typically, how do we, you can think of lots of ways that we might impose a change in price. The most common one is a tax or subsidy, right? So you could think of it as a way of predicting the impact of a tax. Yeah? At the margin. So it allows you to predict that at the margin there's no economic profit? Is that what you're thinking? Yeah. So yes, that is a correct, it is a correct statement. It's not quite what I mean by predict. Because when I say predict, what I mean is sort of observable behavioral changes. Okay? If this happens, then this other thing will happen. The question of whether or not you're going to make a rent or a producer surplus or profit is more on the normative side, right? This allows us to say something about the value to you of entering into the market, for example. It's a little bit fuzzy, but I'm going to call that normative, but it's a correct statement. Yeah?
You can also, you can determine the basic elasticities. You can determine the kind of wealth, if it's surplus lost by imposing that subsidy like that.
But again, once we get into surplus, we're talking about value, which is not prediction. Right? To say I can predict the change in value presupposes that we agree that I'm right about the value, okay? Which is not universally agreed upon. Are there any sociologists in the room? And you're brave to admit it. It's sort of a little bit like the plain-bellied Sneetches and the star-bellied Sneetches, between economists and sociologists. Deep inside, we're all human. But you probably have been taught to think very differently than this, which is worthy, and you bring a valuable contribution. Predictions.
How changes in the quantity of demand or supply would affect the price?
Aha.
Not just one way or the other way.
So how changes in demand, or supply. So the example I have on my notes is, suppose that Clinton finally gets around to approving the XL Keystone pipeline, right, or whatever that thing's called. And so then we would think that the supply of oil, that what people think is that then that would expand the supply, that would push out the supply of oil to somebody. And then, what will that do to prices, right? And then if those prices change, what will that do to, say, demand for natural gas, right? That's the kind of thing you have in mind? Right. One more. Yes. Yes, you who are looking away from me. You were about to raise your hand, weren't you? No, right? I meant you, but weren't you starting to raise your hand? Do you have an answer? Okay. All right. So your group's answer's out there already. Go ahead. All right. I'll let you get away with this one time. Anybody else? Prediction? What else can we predict? Yeah.
The effect on social welfare.
Effect on social welfare. I'm gonna take that as the first answer to the next question. Okay. Okay. So demand shifts on, or supply shifts on, sort of price, etc. Can go on the list as well. Okay. What does it tell us about what's good or bad for society? So now say what you were just saying.
How a shift in demand, supply, or a change in quantity and price can affect the social welfare both for the producer and
Right. So will you believe me if I tell you that that is not a matter of prediction, but rather a matter of valuation? So suppose, for example, that instead of the XL pipeline, what happens to the supply of oil is that there's a massive world war. You may think that's funny, but if you do, you're not Vladimir Putin. Right? So Ukraine's actually quite close to a lot of oil. Suppose there's a serious war, and a whole bunch of oil just goes away. If you've seen pictures of the first Gulf War, you've seen oil disappearing into the sky as a result of war. Okay? This is going to be a bad thing for society, yes? How do we know? Because we can use this model, right? We can sort of say what happens if some supply shifts way in, and what you're going to see is, all right, here, right? That was the price before. This would be the price after. So we had this huge, lovely triangle of social surplus. That was great. And like this whole chunk of it just disappeared into the atmosphere. Okay? Value destroyed. It's not a prediction. It's a statement about what's good or bad. Now, if you're not an economist, or you're an economist who happens to be not being an economist at the moment, and let's say you're Vladimir Putin, okay? Now, he might consider this a fabulous thing, right? Because for the purposes of his domestic politics, his approval ratings can go way up if he starts a huge war, even if he destroys half the world's reserves of oil, right? If in the process he takes over eastern Ukraine, this is going to be seen as a very good thing by a lot of Russian-speaking Ukrainians, right? But economists impose, with our models, a particular definition of value, and we say it's a bad thing, okay? So there are huge normative assumptions built into our models, and we use them for normative purposes to be able to assign value to things. Now, once you've bought into that way of measuring value, then yes, you get to predict what's going to be good or bad. And in that way, you can call that prediction. But what I mean by prediction is predicting actual observable outcomes. Okay? So, the other thing, very importantly, and this is probably, this is, when you were taught this is the thing that the instructor wanted you to remember, whether you did or not, is that under the assumptions of the perfectly competitive market, this equilibrium point, right, Q star, P star, is in fact what's best for society, right? Holding everything constant, including war. What this says is this is the equilibrium, is the point at which the marginal benefit to a consumer of the next unit produced is exactly equal to the marginal cost to the producer of the next unit. And if the benefit to the consumer is the entire benefit to society, right? No externalities, whatever else, and the same on the producer side, then that's a way of saying that last unit was the last unit for which the value to society exceeded the cost. And that's the best place to be. We've produced every unit of whatever this good is for which the benefit outweighs the cost. Plus bon. Good stuff. We like this. Don't intervene in the market, right? Let the market prevail. Laissez-faire. Laissez le bon temps rouler. This is the way to go. Take your nasty government mitts off the market. This is an extremely powerful normative statement, right? This is a very powerful normative statement about what is good for society. And this model proves it, right? Right? I mean, how could you be? You agree with me, right? It's obvious. I mean, what fool sociologist could possibly gainsay this conclusion? We know it's not right. So how do we get at that? Let's talk about what some of the assumptions of this model are. So what did you guys come up with? What are some of the assumptions? Yeah. Perfect information. Great. Which means what?
It means that the information that's presented to the consumer is equal between all of them, and they know what kind of product they're getting.
Right. So, for example, if you sell them a box of Belgian chocolates, we assume that they know whether or not it contains some kind of carcinogen, right? And also that they have the same information as producers, right? So if I'm a producer that happens to have slipped melamine into your milk, which happened several years ago. Was it milk or flour? Melamine is what plastic plates are made out of. And it happens to look a lot like powdered milk. And the consumer doesn't know that, then that's a violation of perfect information. And then in that case, this model doesn't hold. Other assumptions? Yeah. That the constant over different quantities or constant over time? Well, so we see marginal costs going up with quantity, right, and willingness to pay going down with demand. So we're not assuming that they're constant. We're assuming that the relationship between willingness to pay and quantity is constant, holding all else equal, which we'll come back to in a moment. Yes? Rationality. I was hoping that wouldn't be the next one out, but that's a good one. So consumer rationality, is that what you had in mind? Consumer rationality. Now, what does consumer rationality get us? Rationality. Don't try to write when you're talking, unless the thing you're saying is the letters of the word. Consumer rationality. So, in other words, the thing we were just talking about a minute ago, that you have a rank ordering of preferences that allows us to place the correct dollar valuation on how much a good is worth to you. Okay? Rather than poking into that right now, I'll come back to that in the next slide. That's a very important one. Let's get a few others. No externalities. Okay? Quickly define an externality. Well, so if this is the market for hot dogs, me eating a hot dog...
An unintended effect that you don't account for.
An unintended effect on me, like it's poisonous, or an unintended effect on a non-market actor. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just pushing the point. An externality is any time there is a benefit or a harm imposed on some non-market actor by a market transaction. Right? So I buy a hot dog, and as a result... I don't know what the externalities are associated with hot dogs. I have hot dogs on the brain today. I buy an SUV. It increases your chance of dying on the road because I'm not a very good driver. If I ran into you with my scooter, it would not hurt as much as if I ran into you with my new SUV. That's an externality. Yeah? This is what you have in mind. Yeah. Right. We'll talk about externalities in a moment. Basically, if there are externalities, then the height of the consumer demand curve does not represent the value to society as a whole of this product. And likewise, if there are externalities in production, the supply curve does not represent the cost to society because there are additional costs and benefits. Anything else? Yeah. So no barrier to entry. That you're getting at sort of market power. So no monopoly, oligopoly, that kind of thing. Yes? What? Okay, yes. So this is a commodity that the good is the same, so there's no differentiation. So you're ruling out monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. And we encapsulate that with no market power. Okay? And you can go and remind yourself in your 100A textbook, which I know, because you're smart Berkeley students you chose to keep, you can go and remind yourself what that means in general terms. Okay, that's most of it. So we got perfect information. No, sorry. Perfect competition is the no power to fix prices. So that's the no market power. Perfect information, we got that one. No externalities, we got that one. And then there's consumer rationality. Okay? That consumers are rational utility maximizers, which means their choices are based on a correct understanding of the consequences of their choices. That's not just about information. It's about correctly being able to think through, oh, if I eat this hot dog, I am likely to have heartburn at a crucial moment in my life, like, say, for example, when I meet my true love. A correct understanding of the consequences of your choices, and that your true preferences, their choices are based on their true preferences, which is to say what they believe is best for them. We're going to be poking holes in this all semester long. But what I want to try to convince you in the next few minutes is of an appropriate way of thinking about, as we go through this litany of irrationality that we're going to go through this semester, I want you to start with this framework for thinking about why it matters. Okay? Because the answer to the question is actually huge. So, let's talk about what happens when the assumptions fail. Okay. So, where am I? Yeah. Okay. So, you know, you should know, you do know somewhere, that if there's a monopoly, if a firm has market power, is the only seller of a good, like, say, for example, an unregulated electrical utility, even a regulated electrical utility, that they will increase the price above the socially optimal price in order to and decrease the quantity they produce in order to increase their profits. So that who said prediction of no profits? You. So monopoly, you get some economic rent because your market power allows you to price above marginal cost. And you should be able to draw a diagram of that, and then you should be able to think about, well, what would society want to, how exactly would a monopolist behave? Depending on, what is it? They're supposed to locate where the elasticity of demand is 1, or something like this. And what should we do to try to fix it, right? Marginal cost pricing, average cost pricing, that kind of thing. Point being, violation of the assumptions of the perfectly competitive market leads to a very strong conclusion that the free market left to its own devices is not going to optimize social welfare, right? There is a priori grounds for considering government intervention as a way to improve the outcome. Okay? This model tells us this pretty incontrovertibly, and that has become solid theoretical grounds for a very well-accepted system of governance over monopolies. Okay? And it's been wonderful for society. I'm guessing that most of you were not alive before AT&T was split up and had a monopoly on long-distance calling. I was in the United States at that time. My grandparents were in England. I did not talk to them very often. Okay? Monopoly got broken up. We talked to my grandparents more frequently. That made society a better place, in this case. It all depends upon your grandparents, of course. Let's think about perfect information. There's a very important market in our society, in all societies, in which perfect information fails, right? So any market for insurance is going to have an asymmetric information problem. You know more about your risk of incurring health expenses than your insurance company does. This leads to adverse selection. All the healthy people are priced out of the market, and the only people left in the market are the people with really high risks. That drives premiums up. Things are horrible, and society begins to look like Rick Perry's Texas. And the model predicts that, and it predicts it perfectly. And if you're Mitt Romney and you happen to be the governor of Massachusetts, you turn to an economist and you say, use your theory to fix this problem, right? And you come up with a system that should have been known as Romney Care, because that's what Romney did in Massachusetts. He fixed the adverse selection problem using the prescriptions generated by this model of economics. And then when somebody else came along and happened to get elected president, did the exact same thing. They changed the name to Obamacare, and all of a sudden it became a bad thing. But that's public policy that used to be recognized as good because it fixes a known market imperfection. Turns out, I'll let you in on a secret, it's still good public policy because it still fixes a known market imperfection. Okay. Let's think about externalities. Whoops, where am I? Externalities only because it's the easiest one for me to model graphically. Okay? So I'll just use pollution. It's usually where we start with teaching externalities. We burn coal for electricity. This creates pollution. It destroys the world. And so what that means is that the actual marginal cost to society, the social marginal cost of producing electricity, is higher than the marginal cost to the firm. Okay? What that means, right, the optimal place for society to locate on this axis is actually here. Star is the market outcome. Opt is where we would like to be, because this is the point where social marginal benefit is equal to social marginal cost. But we don't wind up there in a free market. We wind up with too much production of electricity, and we wind up with deadweight loss, right? We wind up with this horrible, deadly triangle. It's like the Bermuda Triangle of imperfect markets. And what do? Well, we either tax electricity, or we tax coal, or we tax carbon, or we create a system of pollution permits, cap and trade, all of which is now understood to be bad. It isn't bad, it's very good. It's excellent public policy. If you doubt that, go and Google acid rain and look at what was happening in the 1980s as a result of sulfur dioxide from coal-burning power plants. Then go look at what George H.W. Bush did about it, which is he created a cap-and-trade system based on advice he got from 2 PhD students of a professor at the Goldman School of Public Policy, which is right across the street and where I happen to work, based purely on economic theory. It works. There ain't no more acid rain. So these things work, and we know they work, and we know why they work. Sorry, that was supposed to be here, and this is supposed to be... So that was all supposed to be what happens when the non-rationality assumptions fail. Now, let me erase all this, and we'll talk about what happens when the rationality assumption fails. Okay? So, let's see. I have to do this a little bit quickly so we have time to go over the syllabus. Okay? Suppose you have an internality. Okay? An externality is when there's a deviation between your expressed willingness to pay and the social marginal benefit caused by an external cost or benefit. Internality is when the true value to you as an individual is not represented by your willingness to pay. So we could, for example, say this is expressed willingness to pay, but we might observe, for example, remember we had sort of D20 down here, we might observe D80 instead of sort of the true value to people, the true willingness to pay curve. Sorry, I don't want to call that willingness to pay. What I want to call this is sort of some true rational marginal benefit, right? This is how much benefit you actually get from chocolate, but your willingness to pay might be expressed as something higher or lower. And we would, again, let's say everybody in America was pricing chocolate too low because of some weird anchoring effect. This would be the market outcome, right? And we'd be consuming too little chocolate. or if there was some other deviation, some other anchoring process that was causing us to value it too much, right, then we'd be consuming too much chocolate, okay? And we would have a market failure, okay? This is what's called a behavioral market failure. And the claim that I want to make, the framework that I want to establish for the rest of the semester is this. If you are on board with the basic project of building mathematical models with which to represent consumer and producer behavior and the allocation of society's resources, analyzing failures of the perfectly competitive market model that arise because of the failures of the non-rationality assumptions is no more legitimate than analyzing market failures caused by failure of the consumer rationality assumption. And you don't get to say, right, on any kind of philosophical grounds that correcting market failures because of imperfect competition or imperfect information or imperfect or externalities is somehow more legitimate than correcting market failures that are caused by the failure of rationality. Okay? So here is what Dan Ariely had to say about this topic in his book, in the chapter in which he presents the results that I showed you earlier. He says this: if we can't rely on the market forces of supply and demand to set optimal market prices, and we can't count on free market mechanisms to help us maximize our utility, then we may need to look elsewhere. That is to say, not exclusively to markets. If you accept the premise that market forces and free markets will not always regulate the market for the best, then you may find yourself among those who believe that the government, we hope a reasonable and thoughtful government, must play a larger role in regulating some market activities, even if this limits free enterprise. Yes, a free market based on supply, demand, and no friction would be the ideal if we were truly rational. Yet when we are not rational, but irrational, policies should take this important factor into account, in the same way that policy takes into account things like failure of perfect competition, failure of perfect information, failure of the assumption of no externalities. That doesn't mean that government should intervene. It means there is a legitimate a priori reason to consider government intervention. Okay? That's the driving policy framework of this class. Okay? There's also this theoretical framework about the relationship between positive and normative economics, and we'll be focusing on all of that throughout the semester. Okay? Just to convince you that I'm not just talking about your Social Security card and how it affects Belgian chocolate prices, let me tell you some of the things that are actually on the table. Procrastination and self-control problems. We will look carefully at evidence that people pay for gym memberships which they do not then use. Okay? Don't do this. You probably already do. And then they procrastinate canceling their membership after they've demonstrated that they won't use it. Right? So then we might think that the demand curve for gym memberships is too high, above what people actually get out of it. The value, their true value, their rational value. Then there's the issue of excessive discounting of future costs and benefits. How much are you saving for your retirement right now? Whatever the answer is, it's the wrong answer. You should be saving more. That's not exactly true. But I'll tell you what, if you get to 30 and you're not saving for your retirement, which was true for me, you're doing the wrong thing. And it's probably because you're not thinking about the future appropriately in the ways that normative economic models would suggest you should. And this is pervasive throughout the population. Things like this happen. People don't take their medication even if it might save their lives, and even if it really, really is definitely going to save your life, right? You have HIV. If you don't take your meds, you can be pretty sure you're going to die of something related to AIDS. And if you do, you will be virus-free. This has been demonstrated now. If you take your ARTs religiously, rigorously, you can actually get your viral load down to the point where you're not even infectious. And yet, if you look at the percentage of HIV, people living with HIV who actually take their ARTs according to the regimen prescribed, it's shockingly low. Okay? And we think that this is not rational, and it's a huge problem. So we might think that the demand curve for those meds is too low, or for adherence to those meds. Okay? People don't save enough for retirement. Because we're not thinking about retirement, we're thinking about that new Suzuki Bergman AN400 that I just bought a few months ago and then somebody tipped over and now it's destroyed. So we might think that the demand for future consumption, retirement income, is too low. Okay? And then there are other things. This thing that is referred to as the hot-cold empathy gap. People buy more food when they're hungry. Okay? That doesn't make much sense. You're buying food for the whole week. Shouldn't matter how hungry you are when you go into the store, but it does. People tend to think that they'll use condoms when they're aroused, even though in many cases they won't. So this might suggest that the demand curve for, let's say, birth control pills, which is a way of committing yourself to future sanity, right, might be too low. These things are pervasive, and they're important. And we'll spend the rest of the semester looking at these kinds of examples. Okay? So, summary of where we're going this semester. Economic models are built using the building blocks of assumptions. We've already seen some of that in review. They are used for predictive purposes and for normative evaluation purposes, and they provide insight into what is good or bad for society and what government should or shouldn't do about it. Assumptions, this is just an incontrovertible fact about the scientific process. Assumptions are made to be questioned. If you don't question your assumptions, you do not have a legitimate claim to be an intelligent scholar. If our assumptions fail in systematic and predictable ways that we can observe and prove, our models will give us the wrong answers. Period, end of sentence. Better assumptions, that is to say, in this case, psychologically more realistic assumptions, should provide us with better answers. And so what behavioral economics is about is taking psychological realism, inserting it into our mathematical models in order to make those models fit reality better. And what we're going to see is that this will consistently improve the predictive power of our models, but it will wreak havoc. It will create a lot of confusion with respect to the normative, valuative, what's good for society uses of our models. Okay. So I'm going to talk about that next time we meet. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to ask the GSIs, can you guys come jogging up here real quick, to run through the crowd passing out the syllabus. Where are you guys? There's Waldo, there's Tarso, and, oh, that's right, we only have two, so I'll help. So there's some for you, you can do that. Okay. All right, so some for you. Whoops. Some for you. Actually, you know what? You do this. I'm just going to start talking. Okay. I'm going to start talking about the syllabus before it's completely handed out. So let me get your attention. Please let me hold your attention. Please don't get distracted. Okay. So parts of this I'm just going to read. The course description. The field of psych and econ, which we call behavioral economics, is a comprehensive attempt to take the methodology of economic theory beyond the standard assumptions of rationality and self-interest. The goal is to develop models that more accurately describe and predict economic phenomena. The guiding principle is to select modeling assumptions on the basis of psychological realism rather than mathematical or normative convenience. This course is an introduction to the field. The goals of the course are to explore more thoroughly the assumptions, implications, and failures of several fundamental standard economic models and to develop alternative behavioral models based on findings from psychology. Okay? Actually, my secret goal, which I'll reveal right at the beginning, is that what I really want is for you to come away understanding the standard rational model better. And in the process, you'll see how economists use models, what the sort of philosophical underpinnings of them are, and you'll also see a healthy dose of the ways in which they fail. Okay. The syllabus. This may seem a little bit goofy, but this is important. This syllabus is a contract. You'll notice that each part of the syllabus has a little place where you put your initials. And so my expectation and your responsibilities are laid out in detail in the syllabus. Please read it thoroughly. Initial each section to acknowledge that you have read and understood it. Sign it at the bottom and submit it to your GSI no later than the second section meeting of the semester. It says of the first week, but that's obviously wrong because there's only one per week. Second section meeting of your section of the semester. Print out a copy of this, initial everything, sign it, turn it into your GSI. Okay. The prerequisite for this course, and a number of you emailed me about this already, the prerequisite is either Economics 100A, Intermediate Microeconomic Analysis, or 101A, or their equivalent. Okay? I strongly discourage you from taking this class if you do not satisfy the prerequisites, that prerequisite. Okay? The whole class is predicated on you having a basic understanding of rational economic theory. And you will almost certainly suffer if you take this class without that understanding. I'm not in a position to prevent you, but if you don't meet the prerequisite and you seriously insist on taking the class, please come and talk to me first. All right, where am I? I'm not moving forward. Okay, this is just some basics. Enrollment, you're all used to this game. You have to go to the first section, get your name on the, the GSI will take roll. If you do not show up for the first section, if you do not show up for section before next Thursday, you'll be summarily dropped from the class. That's not up to me. That's just a requirement of the department. If you have any questions about enrollment, you will have to approach the head GSI, whose name is Jennifer Kwan. Weirdly enough, though I hold an exalted position in the institution, I have zero control over enrollment. And the same is true of your GSIs. There is literally nothing we can do for you. So contact the head GSI. My office hours, 9:45 to 11:45 on Thursdays. My office is in the Goldman School, GSPP, which most of you probably never been to. You find it on the campus map. It's on the corner of Leroy and Hearst, right across from Soda Hall, which is the building that looks like a public bathroom turned inside out. And it's kitty corner from the place where people were recently protesting cutting down 5 redwoods. So what are my office hours about? It's about one-on-one conversations. I will meet about problem sets, but I'm not going to do group meetings about problem sets. You can bring a friend or two if you want. We can talk about other course material. We can talk about your research ideas. We can talk about your career, graduate school plans, your life, or anything else you want to talk about. I encourage you, if you have any question or thought or concern or interesting idea that you think you might be able to get useful input from me on, come to my office hours. I love to talk. Well, you can probably tell that already. Okay. If you want to do group office hours stuff on problem sets, please attend your GSI's office hours. If you can't make my office hours, let me know. I'll try to accommodate you. Okay. You've got my email. Feel free to email me about anything you like. But, and now you're going to think this guy's a real jerk, but this is my basic expectation, okay? You send me an email, be professional, okay? Begin each email with Professor Ackland. Use complete words, complete sentences, and complete paragraphs, okay? Which is to say, if you're sending me an email from your phone, it's going to take you a little time, which is fine by me. Then I try to say, let's hold this a little loosely. Don't agonize it. Don't agonize over this standard. Just pretend that you're sending an email to a professor at a major research university. Okay. Website. So we'll be using BSpace. I didn't know this, but I now know that students hate that because now you're all transitioning to B courses. I'm using B spaces because B courses is much harder for the professors, and I decided to put my time into making the course better rather than learning B courses, and I'm sorry that I didn't realize that that was going to place an annoying burden on you guys, but that's where we're at. So you have the BSpace address here. No, you're automatically enrolled in it, so you should be able to find the course on BSpace. So I'll use that for sending announcements via email. You're responsible for reading all emails carefully. And go on to make sure that BSpace is sending you daily email to an account that you read every day, and that you will get both low and high priority announcements. Okay. Yeah. So, sections. Let me very briefly introduce you to your GSIs. So, Tarso Madera is there. Stand up. Waldo Ojeda, am I pronouncing it right, is here. And Kay Dawn Powers, Kristen Dawn Powers, she prefers to go by Dawn, is not here yet, but will be here at the next lecture. You have the sections that they're teaching. You have their email addresses. Basic rule, you are free with your GSI's consent to attend their other section, but you may not attend the section of another GSI unless you come to me and we formally change the enrollment. Otherwise, it can create a burden on the GSIs. So your GSIs, to a first order approximation, know about as much about behavioral economics as I do, so treat them as a useful resource. Okay, online forum. Raise your hand if you've used Piazza in another class. Good. Okay, so we're going to use Piazza for you guys to ask and answer questions about the problem set and about exam preparation. If you are not familiar with Piazza, follow the link, enroll, sign up for it. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's going to be a lot like a lot of other things you've seen. And for sure, you will be able to figure it out faster than I can explain it to you. Because you are, by and large, under 30, and I am very much not under 30. Okay, this is the deal with Piazza. Okay, if you have a question about a problem set, you can go to your GSI's office hours, you can come to my office hours, you can go to your GSI's section, or you can post your question on Piazza. Most people find this very helpful. What you should not do is to email your GSI that question. Your GSI will simply redirect you to Piazza. Okay? You feel free to email me or your GSI about absolutely anything else, but if you have a question about problem set or exam review, it goes on Piazza. And if you absolutely can't get an intelligent answer on Piazza, then go to your section or office hours. Okay. Lectures. There's no textbook for this class. There are a couple of textbooks in the market. They're what they are, but they're not assigned because they're no good. There are readings. Some of them are required. Many of them aren't. They will not even remotely tell you what you need to know. Not even remotely. The content of this class is in this room. Attendance is extremely important, and you should come. The projector feed and my voice will be on webcast. There's a link there. You can go on YouTube. But with an 8-day delay. This is to discourage you from even considering relying upon this as a substitute for attendance at lectures. I do not post my notes or slides online because I want you in the classroom. Okay, iClickers. You've all used iClickers, right? Pretty much. If you haven't, you just go to the student store and you buy one or get one online or borrow one from a friend, whatever it is. You need to have your iClicker by Tuesday. And we'll be using iClickers in every class period. You will get 1 participation point per lecture, and they'll count for some percentage of your grade, which is not huge but non-trivial. You earn that participation point by clicking some button on your clicker for 80% of the questions that I ask in each class. And if that's not a nice round integer, then we round down in your favor. You get 4 free passes per semester. And the reason we do that is because you might not be able to attend, your clicker might not work, something like that. I will give you the same answer every single time, which is that's one of your 4 free passes. So apportion them wisely. You need to go and get them, your iClicker registered. That's all on there. It's fine to use your clicker before it's registered. We will record the points, but you have to have it registered if you want to actually get credit for those points. Okay, if you are found with somebody else's clicker in your hand, or if somebody else is found with your clicker in their hand, what does it say? You will be pilloried and put onto a stake. It's considered cheating. If caught, both parties will be disciplined. I'm not going to specify what that means, but I will just go through formal channels. Please don't do it. It's not worth it. The point of this class is that if you do things the way I have suggested, you are, I want to say, likely to learn more. Okay? So don't do things just to get a grade. Do them because you'll learn. Okay? All right. Now, here's where I come off as a real jerk. Multitasking. There is no such thing as multitasking. What we call multitasking is doing two things badly at the same time. Okay? And there's actually quite a lot of research to show that only about 2% of the population can actually multitask effectively. So don't do it. To help you to not multitask, I have the following rules. And I'm pretty strict about it. No laptops. Unless it's required by DSP or you happen to be Tarso Madeira, you don't get to have a laptop open in this room. Okay? Or a tablet or its equivalent. So that's just what it is. And again, there's a lot of research on laptops in the classroom, and they are unambiguously shown to be not good pedagogy. So no laptops. No texting. Just leave your smartphone in your pocket. If you need to know the time, I'm happy to tell you. No outside work, right? If you've got a deadline in another class, take the hit, go do it. Don't do it here. And talking, I say no talking. Now, you're going to have to self-regulate on this a little bit, because what I actually mean is this. If you want to turn to your neighbor and say, what did he just say? Or, what's delta? What's beta hat? In a whisper, brief, and leave it at that. Okay. And then what I say here is, I will enforce these rules with mild public embarrassment. Okay? I'll call you out gently and in a sort of dorky, avuncular way, and it'll make you want to stop. But it won't hurt your feelings. Okay. Readings. Sorry we're running out of time. I'll just say one thing about the readings. The readings are all online on BSpace. The only thing you need to know about the readings is that I have this little system of margin notation. If there's a solid line in the margin, it means this part's not assigned. If there's a dashed line in the margin, it means this part is assigned, but it's kind of optional. You might or might not understand it. The solid line is usually for stuff that you have very little chance of understanding because it's too advanced. These are all published journal articles. Okay. Exams. I don't want to hold you, so I'm going to have to go over that. But before you go, I'm just going to skip to the honor code. You need to read the section about exams. It's extremely important, and you need to read the section about grading. But I want you to hear what I have to say about the honor code. The honor code is a new innovation brought to us by the Associated Students of the University of California, and it says this. The student community at UC Berkeley has adopted the following honor code. Quote, as a member of the UC Berkeley community, I act with honesty, integrity, and respect for others. The hope and expectation is that you will adhere to this code. Okay? You may or you may not, and that is your business. I personally don't put a lot of stock in this honor code, so I want to drive a point home to you. Okay? It's very easy in life to lose sight of what honesty, integrity, and respect for others really means. So here's a practical suggestion. If even a small voice within you says, I would not want my fellow students, my parents, or my professor to know about this, just don't do it. Okay? The cost that you will impose on yourself in terms of losing honor, losing your own self-respect, and possible consequences is just never worth it. Okay? So that is all. I apologize for the extra 30 seconds of your time I took, and I hope to see all of you on Tuesday.